You guys have an innovative preschool program, and I think preschool is really critical, partly because of brain development, but partly because a lot of the parents in low-income communities, as you guys know, part of the problem with organizing them is they don't know what they don't have. And I think one of the things about preschool that is potentially transformative is if you can give parents a great education, with a great experience with their first experience with education, it plants the seeds of a revolution because they have a frame of reference. So a year ago today is about when we launched that video. At the time, the parent revolution really was just a crazy idea that parents should have the power to transform their local schools. And now, as we stand here today, it is literally codified into state law for every single parent in the entire state of California, and it is spreading to other states and even other countries. The story of this is that about a year ago, we were really struggling. We were struggling to figure out a way to change the game in parent organizing, to incentivize parents to do this themselves, to not, be automatons and do what, we or some other community organization tells them to do, but to empower them to transform schools on their own. A kid's first agenda is also good for a whole bunch of grown-ups. It's good for kids if teachers are paid a whole lot more money. It's good for kids if teachers are respected inside and outside the classroom. It's good for kids if teachers are empowered to teach from their heart and they're not micromanaged by some bureaucrat who's never set foot inside that classroom and never met their kids. And it's even good for kids if teachers are unionized. And I think you guys are actually demonstrating this in Denver, and I think that is a game changer. It's good for kids if teachers are unionized as long as it's a reform contract where there's accountability. So what the parents basically said was, make us a better deal or we're leaving. And we're going to shut your school down, and we're going to keep doing that over and over and over again until you learn to run schools rooted in what's good for kids rather than what's good for grown-ups. And people listened. The first reaction we got was, what's the deal? What's your bottom line? What are you looking for? And our answer was really simple. There is no deal. Learn how to run a school better than a high-quality charter school. And do it right now because parents can't freeze dry their kids. And by the way, we're rooting for you. We'll work with you. We not only want you to succeed, we need you to succeed because reform cannot simply be about charter schools because we can't serve all kids that way. And now every single parent in California in the attendance boundary of a failing school for the first time in American history has the power to transform their schools simply through community organizing. I think all this means is that we're living in a revolutionary moment. But I think we've got to all understand, we all have a responsibility to understand, that revolutionary moments come and go more quickly than any of us can imagine or predict. Any student of history knows that. And so, the question for us is, are we all going to stand up and stand together and seize this moment and transform public education for our kids? Or are we going to let this moment slip through our fingers and lock in the status quo for a whole new generation of our kids?
I mean, I'm always so excited when we have a big call out, a big action. I'm like a little kid, like, ooh, 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 it's like, they're really coming on board now. So I think it's just nurturing the relationship with a lot of African American parents, and I think we have to approach it in a different way. I mean, some of our organizers have gone into projects and been sitting in the kitchen, and the police is coming in through the front door, raiding the apartment. So it's just kind of meeting people where they are.
And I want to emphasize also that this cannot be about charter schools. If it is, we will lose. We will fail. Charter schools are very valuable. They create a model. They create experiments and models that we can overlay into traditional public schools. Good charter schools serve kids well, but they're bad charter schools and they should be shut down just like bad traditional public schools. But the value that we see in charter schools from parent revolution's perspective is they give parents power. They give parents leverage to negotiate reforms with the school district in a context they never would have otherwise. We need to inculcate a new culture of power amongst parents. So we're going to do this right, which means we're going to do this slowly. The teachers union in Los Angeles has been ardently opposed to performance-based contracts like what you have in Denver for a generation. And what they basically did by winning the bidding process to run 22 new schools in Los Angeles is sign the biggest performance-based contract in America. They are now on the hook to run these schools. They will be held accountable for the results of how these schools operate. We will, either way, I think it's going to be an okay outcome. Either we are proven wrong and they have radical success, we will be the happiest people in the world if we're proven wrong. And I told A.J. Duffy, the president of the teachers union, that we will march hand in hand with him to expand his model if we are proven wrong. But if they are proven wrong, then I don't really think they have a leg to stand on anymore defending the status quo. The last thing about our relationship with UTLA is that they actually understand that we are progressives. Now, there are certainly elements in the reform movement in Los Angeles, and I would imagine the reform movement nationally, that approach education reform from a right-wing perspective. And probably approach education reform from the perspective of having some secret agenda to devolve public education. We approach this from the perspective, from a progressive perspective. We want to restore the public's faith and confidence in public education. For philosophical as well as pragmatic reasons, we deeply believe in unionized reform. We deeply believe that unions are not the problem, the contract is the problem. We need a contract where grown-ups are accountable for student performance. But we know, because of proof points all around America and because of some proof points in Los Angeles, that you can have a wall-to-wall unionized environment in a kids' first environment. Ultimately, parents and teachers have way more in common with each other than we have that divides us, because you can't have a great school without great teachers. So ultimately, we have to march together. And we understand if in the short term we can't, because we're in a power struggle right now. And parents are going to take power, and we're going to use that power to negotiate a kids' first agenda. But after we get parity, and I think we're getting close to parity because of the parent trigger in California, we need to figure out a way to march together. So if we can't be current partners, we have to at least acknowledge that we're going to be future partners. And if that's going to be the case, we got to calibrate our rhetoric to that. We can't be calling each other evil if we're going to be marching together eventually. It's just ridiculous. I think I've actually been a huge culprit of this over the last decade, which is that people in the reform community tend to talk about education reform like we're all in a Kennedy School of Government class. And I mean, you guys have done some really innovative stuff. Like the teacher's contract that you have, at least from an outsider perspective, is really innovative. That you, with an NEA-affiliated teachers union, have negotiated a pay-for-performance contract. But for most parents, that is meaningless. It's gobbledygook. And until we can actually start talking about education reform, I'm not talking about dumbing it down, but talking about education reform in elemental terms that are meaningful to parents, this is never going to be a movement. It's going to be an elite movement. And the reason we won was the idea was just too hard to argue with. Now, the other side is really good at arguing against charter schools. They're really good. I'm sure they love it when we get all wonky and pat ourselves in the back for passing a reform union contract. But they can't argue with the simple notion that parents should have power to advocate for their own children. And we got to start talking about education reform in terms that parents can understand if we want to engage parents and we want to turn this into something other than what it is, which is a conversation among elites. It's got to be a movement if it's ever going to stick. And I think it's becoming a movement. It's a movement in Los Angeles. It's a movement in California. It's a movement now in Connecticut. I think it's a movement that really is taking hold. But we got to talk about this in different terms. It's about parents taking power because they're in the best position to make decisions about what's good for their kids.